Hey, JD here. Welcome to the Mead House. You know, over the past several years, we've brought you over 125 episodes of mead making, education, information, and entertainment. More than 80 guests have stopped by the Mead House. Professional mead makers, medal-winning home mead makers, competition organizers, experts on yeast and honey specialists have all visited to share their knowledge. The Mead House is produced for home mead makers and brewers looking for a bit of inspiration and information from the many guests and discussions we have here at the house. You can help support the Mead House by joining the Mead House Keyholder Club on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com and search for the Mead House. There's also a link in the show notes. For as little as $2 a month, you can become a key holder. We've teamed up with some great companies to provide thank you gifts for your support. So get on over to Patreon, join the Mead House Keyholder Club, and get your own set of keys to the Mead House. Hey, you can listen to the Mead House podcast with your favorite player and be sure to rate us 5 stars on iTunes or your favorite listening venue. The Mead House. Mead making entertainment you just don't want to miss. Hey, welcome to the Mead House, and thanks for listening to episode number 142. Hey, you know where to find us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and there's just a whole lot of places out there. They're all listed on the front page of the website, themeadhouse.com. Hey, the Mead House. It's produced for home mead makers and brewers just like you and me, looking for a bit of inspiration and information from the many guests and discussions we have here at the house. Talk to us. We're on Facebook and Twitter, both at the Mead House, or you can just simply email us, info@themeadhouse.com. Hey, Jeff and Ryan are both seated at the bar. I'm JD Webb. In this episode, did you ever think that in your backyard you may have everything you need to start fermenting a mead or a beer? It's true. That blueberry bush over there? How about that wild mint over by the philodendron? How about the water from the aquifer in the neighbor's yard? How about that honey and that wild hive up in the magnolia tree? Hell, even the yeast is there too. Think I'm kidding? Our guest this episode is Sam Wineka from Bootleg Biology, an organization that has been instrumental in cultivating wild yeast. In segment 2, the mailbag, Bradley MacArthur says he's having some issues with an amber braggot that he worked on. And then from our Facebook Messenger, Dan Shannon asks about conical fermenters. We'll get into that in segment 2, and we'll roll right from there into Facebook friends here tonight. Hey, all that and more here at the Mead House. But first, thanks to all the Mead House key holders who help keep the Mead House podcast free. You too can become a Mead House key holder and help support the show for as little as $2 a month. We've got some great thank you gifts to send to you. So get on over to patreon.com, search for the Mead House, or do the easy thing. Just click on the link in the show notes. What are we drinking tonight, guys? It's been almost 2 years ago. I made this stout, maybe not 2, maybe about a year and let's go like a year and 8 months. I made this stout, and it's kind of a chocolatey coffee thing, and I came out really good out of the fermenter. It tasted good. This was the first first bourbon barrel project. Okay, remember we got the barrels from Balcones, and my first barrel, I put the stout in it. Well, it stayed in there for almost a year, maybe even more than a year, maybe a year and a couple of months. Got it kegged up finally. And it's been sitting in a keg for months and months and months, too. The wife and I have been sipping on this thing now for about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. This stuff is unbelievably good. It's got this almost like a dark chocolate flavor to it. A little tiny bit of coffee. The coffee is more, you don't necessarily get that roasted coffee flavor. But it's there. It's just a hint of it. And I think it really complements that dark chocolate flavor that we get out of it. The bourbon barrel, there are some nuances of the bourbon in the stout. It's super smooth. I mean, this thing is one of those fireplace, sit in front of the fireplace brews, with a couple of chocolate chip cookies. This stuff is really good. And in my other fist, I here a while back I did a mead, just a straight up semi-sweet mead with 71B. I used 2 packets of 71B, and I used a mix of wildflower honey, some of the stuff that I got out of South Dakota, and then some of the local wildflower here that I pick up from my beekeeper. And I just let her rip. It fermented at 68 degrees, finished out very nicely. It's about 14% or so. It's crystal clear. It's been sitting in a carboy, the very last glass carboy that I own, and with a little chunk of white oak, toasted white oak. And guys, I'm thinking, one of the 2 bourbon barrels that I have actually has bourbon in it. I put 5 gallons of bourbon back in it just to keep it wet and keep it, kind of rolling. So I'm thinking seriously about taking this mead and dumping that barrel back into the bottles and putting this mead in that barrel and just let it sit for a year, however long it takes, a year, a little more maybe. But we can talk about that a little bit later on. But when I taste it, this is something I could drink. It's got a sweetness to it. It's not over the top. It hits you right on the front of the tongue. It finishes off very nicely. The wood starts to come through mid palate. It finishes off just kind of on the dry side a little bit, which I kind of like. It's got a very nice mouthfeel to it. I think that's coming from that little chunk of wood that I dropped into it. Been in there now for about 5 weeks or so. So it's really coming around. So that's what I'm doing here tonight. Let's flip it over to Jeff. What did you put in your cup tonight, buddy?
So, guys, tonight I have something really, really special. I think you guys recall Eric Bossack at all? He had really early in the run of the show, he had brewed the hibiscus and chamomile mead that won third in category at Mazer several years back, that I had posted on the website. Yeah. And he did a gorgeous job with the labeling and presentation and stuff like that. And I've mentioned him a couple times before on the show. Eric lives in Japan, and Eric has been busy. He just released his first commercial batch of mead, Wicked Way Meads Arcanum. And it just so happened that my good friends Chris and Leah were going to Japan a few weeks ago. So they brought me back a bottle. They were actually able to facilitate a international bottle trade with me. So,
wow.
Eric got a couple bottles of mine, and I am drinking one of Eric's here. It is a traditional made with rapeseed honey, which is it's the same plant as canola oil comes from.
Yeah.
It has this ridiculously sweet and gorgeous, floral nectar aroma, and it's semi-sweet but not cloyingly sweet. It has kind of a little bit of acidity and just a tiny bit of astringency right on the aftertaste. Fades really cleanly. It's just a very nice, delicate, light little mead. I'm really enjoying it. And then in my other glass, I have about a half a pint of my. This was version 2 of my Saison Braggot that I messed with a little bit and added a bunch of wild stuff to. It's starting to mellow out with age, but I think this is one of those lessons where if you're going to go and do wild stuff like adding, in my case, smoked peppercorns and use a new yeast and do different hops, you probably ought to do just one at a time so you can figure out where you went wrong. Because I've had better. I've made better.
Yeah. Okay.
So Ryan, what's in your glass?
So usually when we come back from hiatus, we talk about what we've been brewing. We had time to brew when we were away. I didn't brew anything while I was away, but I did a lot of drinking.
Shame on you.
And I I kind of working my way through the wine rack a little bit there, and came across a little pocket of bottles that I didn't forget about them, but I haven't had one in a while. And I opened one of these up tonight, and it is a Pyment. It's a white Pyment, a mixed variety of grape juices, and it's very sherry-like. So it's very pleasant, but it's got it reminds me very much of a sherry, and then it's got a lot of honey on the back end. Now it's dry, like that honey has come back into this. This is maybe going on 2 years old, and it's very good. But I wish I would have oaked it. I wish I would have put maybe a medium toast, French oak in there or something, just to really round it out and smooth it out. And I think it would have been something really special had I done that. But as it is, it's still a pleasant one to drink. And no, I'm not going to take the time to take them all out of the bottle and siphon them out and add an oak cube and then put them all, back in a bottle. So I'm just going to do it as is. But it's surprising. I didn't think it was going to turn out like this, but it did, and it's good. And sometimes that happens.
There you go.
Yeah. Guest tonight, as JD mentioned, is Sam Winica. He is the lab manager at Bootleg Biology, and that is probably the shortest intro you've ever heard me give because Sam didn't send us a bio. So we're gonna wing it. Sam, welcome to the show. What's in your cup tonight?
I'm actually drinking some Freem Pills. I muled back from Oregon. A couple of our bootleg team members and I were out at NanoCon last week. It's a conference for small brewers put on by BYO Magazine, and drinking a lot of Freem Pills while I was out there, and decided to stuff some in my bag for the trip home. So back here in Nashville, we're drinking an Oregon beer.
Excellent. Well, Sam, why don't you tell us about Bootleg Biology?
Sure. Yeah. So Bootleg Biology, our founder Jeff Mello started it really as a thing called the Local Yeast Project, and the goal of the Local Yeast Project was to capture a yeast from every zip code in the United States. And so we started doing that, just out of his basement, really. Just people were sending him samples. He was isolating them and banking them, and making yeast from the samples they sent. And that sort of grew into a commercial operation. And now we sell yeast to commercial breweries. That's our primary business. And then we also sell yeast to home brewers, and we do our local yeast project still. So we're still taking samples, and we're still collecting yeast from zip codes. So,
and the yeast project, or the backyard yeast, or the yeast project, was the way that I found out about. The first time I heard about you guys. There are 40,000 plus zip codes in the U.S.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
How are you guys doing on that?
We have several hundred banked already, So we're still waiting on some of you guys out there in rural Montana. Get us a sample. We need it. But yeah, I mean we're just that's the goal. So send us your yeast.
So I'm curious. So now, when you look at these different yeasts, what what do you find? Are they dramatically different, or are they just simple mutations of each other? I'm curious as to hear what you guys find in the few hundred or the hundreds, I should say, that you've looked at.
Sure. Well, so we get a sample. They come in any number of forms. People will send us our sort of preferred method for people to capture yeast is to make a small starter of wort, or in y'all's case, you could use honey. You could use any real like sugar source, or food source that yeast like, and to place it in a jar, put it out in your yard overnight. See if you get a little CO2 production out of something like that you leave out in your yard. And by that I mean capping it for a couple of days after you leave it out in your yard and loosening the cap and see if you hear the little sound like opening a soda bottle, like that's that'd be the sign of something working in there. And then sending us a liquid sample, that's like our ideal sample. But people also send us flowers, fruits, other flora. Just they've put in a sample jar, and we can then add media to that. Like basically in our case, we use a simplified version of beer as our media for that kind of thing. So we'll add it to that sample and see if anything produces out of that. And then we're streaking it out on different plate media. One that we have that sort of selects for Saccharomyces and some Brettanomyces, one that selects for bacteria like Lactobacillus and Pediococcus. And we'll see what we get. And then let the person who sent us a sample know, and if it's something they want, then we'll culture up a small little prop and send it back. But I'd say most of the things we find are Saccharomyces. There's sort of a misconception that all wild yeast is Brettanomyces. A souring yeast, basically, or well, not a souring yeast, but a yeast that produces some funky flavors. You're going to depend on bacteria for more souring stuff, but and really most of the yeast out there is Saccharomyces, or some kind of relative of it.
Yeah. And is that now are these samples the ones that you kind of isolate and culture up and then create your commercial and home strains from?
A little bit of both. So the core strains of yeast that we sell that are sort of unique to our lab include a couple local yeast project strains. Our Arlingtonensis lager yeast was actually the first strain that Jeff captured when he was starting up the company, and it actually turned out to be a Pastorianus lager strain found in Arlington, Virginia. That's kind of my house strain. I make a lot of lagers with that. But then our Chardonnay strain came off of a Chardonnay grape that somebody sent in for a local yeast project. We have a sort of a mega souring blend we call Sour Solera that changes up 3 times a year or so. And every time we change that blend, sometimes that includes adding new local yeast cultures to it. It's sort of just a catch-all for all the new cool sour beer bugs we find, and we throw everything in there. So it's one of the more fun things we do.
Very cool. And I know that as we're talking about folks capturing yeast, you also produce a backyard wrangling kit. So tell us about how somebody can go about just capturing yeast in their backyard or the park.
Sure. Yeah. Like if you buy the kit, it sort of collects all the sort of necessary equipment for you to actually do it at home. But we can also, take part of that process out of it. But sort of the general preferred method would be starting out, like I said, making a jar of wort or honey or, whatever your preferred. If you're looking for a wild yeast that would make mead, for instance, in y'all's case, using honey is probably a good idea because if something is going to go after that honey, it's probably more inclined to go after, it's adapted to that purpose. So it's a good method to use. Whereas if you're looking for beer, you might probably want to make some beer to capture yeast because it's going to be any organism that works on that beer is probably going to be inclined to make beer. But
you're talking like a regular beer starter around 1040 gravity.
Yep.
Somewhere. Okay, same. So it would be the same thing on the mead side, or using honey, staying around the 1040 range. Is that?
Yeah, I would shoot for a lower gravity. For the general purpose reason that most of your wild yeasts are not as hardy as a cultured brewing yeast. The yeasts that have been sort of adapted to this purpose for hundreds of years, like lager yeasts or like your American ale yeasts or whatever they are, they tend to be the best organisms at making beer or making mead. So the ones in the wild are usually not quite as good. So the weaker gravity is better for that. But you put a low gravity starter, cover it with some cheesecloth, in a jar, and put it out overnight in your backyard, or put it near your flower bushes or under a tree, or wherever you think you might get the most activity. If you got bees in the area or things like that are good places to start, and then cap it up the next day. And if you get some CO2 production, like I was talking about before, then there's a good chance you have something. You could either take a sample like that, send it to a lab like Bootleg, or you could plate out that sample on your own at home using like an agar plate, and see what you get.
I think Ryan and Jeff are probably best suited for that. I'm afraid if I was to do something like that, I live in Southern California, Sam, right between a very busy street and a freeway. So the yeast that I would collect would probably taste like rolled rubber tires and diesel smoke. So.
Yeah, well, Cantillon, the famous Belgian lambic brewery, is in a very industrial, dirty part of town in Brussels too. So you never know.
Never know.
You never know. You could have the good stuff.
Yeah.
Just wait after a heavy rain, JD, and then do it right after that, so it knocks all the dust out of the air.
I've always been curious about some of the, we've been toying around with different yeast, and my own brewing, what I like to do is mostly braggots, beers and braggots. And braggot is a category of mead made with malt, so I have tried using some of the wine yeast with very poor results, and I switched over to using strictly beer yeast for all of my braggots. Now that's not to say that I haven't tried beer yeast and just a straight up mead, just honey and water too, which I think work. Some of them work out very well. One of the, and here again, I mean, there's no, all of the wine yeasts are made for wine. I mean, they've been, I don't know how you guys do it, work on the DNA or the GMO or however the hell it's done. But they're all made for certain types of grapes and that kind of thing. There's no yeast out there made for honey. Okay, there just isn't. So, so I look at the yeast at the yeast farm out there as take your pick. When it comes to making mead, either wine yeast or beer yeast. I mean, come on, there's thousands of them out there. One of the ones that I really like and have really had some really good success with. Same with the boys here at the meat house is a Kavik yeast. Now I see you guys have one called Aurora, which sounds very similar because this is a drop and forget it. It'll ferment at very high temperatures with it looks like pretty good flocculation. Tell me about that particular strain.
Sure. Yeah. From my understanding, it's Kawike.
Kawike.
Our boss Jeff, when we got our Kawike strains from a Norwegian brewery, well, our main, like our biggest seller right now is the Oslo yeast that we got from a beer brewed by a Kawike sort of centric brewery in Oslo, and from what I understand, it's Kawike like bike.
Yeah.
That's how I remember it.
Okay.
But it's they're the biggest thing in yeast right now. I'd say they're sort of superorganisms made for churning through a batch of beer in really fast time and really high temperatures without any off flavors. It's sort of the short and long and short of it. But
Yeah.
It's interesting to hear that they're working well for you guys in mead. I was actually going to ask you guys if you've used any, because they seem to work well in just about everything. And
Yeah.
whereas like beer yeasts are sort of adapted for the maltodextrose and sort of more complex sugars, and your wine yeasts are typically better for simpler sugars. But I was actually glad you brought that up. To get to your question, I guess, about the Aurora, we had a Norwegian local yeast contributor send us some samples. He's located near the Hornindal region of Norway, and we got that isolate from there. And it's got a nice orangey flavor to it.
Nice.
Sort of like an orange rind. I would describe it as sort of like a little bit more bitter, sort of orange part of an orange.
Sure.
And the Oslo is just a super clean, just very neutral.
Yeah. And that suits. We've talked about using this particular strain of yeast in mead making because of its capability, its ability to ferment at high temperatures. A lot of what we deal with here is temperature control when we're making mead. Some of the wine yeasts are fairly particular about what temperature they ferment at. So consequently, you've got to have some sort of some method of controlling temperatures in order to brew a successful batch. Well, Jeff and Ryan and I have found that, using this particular strain of yeast who was it, Ryan? Somebody did it at over 100 degrees. I don't know if it was one of our guests.
Carvin was doing that recently. Carvin Wilson.
Yeah, over
105.
Yeah.
I think Paul Johnson was doing that too up there, north of 100.
Yeah, and
I think he poured samples at the Valkyrie's Horn after party with.
That's right.
At the traditional that he made at 108 degrees or something.
Yeah. Yeah, so this particular yeast, Sam, really lends itself well, I think, to the mead making world because of that one. Just because of that one, and I like the orange part because, Jeff, I'm thinking like orange blossom honey together with this yeast. Just let her rip. And maybe some orange, some kind of orange flavoring from amaretti or something to complement that orange later on.
Well, and I'm thinking of so many different fruits that would be nice with this as a melomel. Just, think of how many things that kind of the slightly bitter orange flavor would combine nicely with. Blueberries, and blackberries, just very sweet flavors. With a little bit of that bitter citrus would just brighten them up a little bit. I think there's a lot of promise to that. Yeah.
Josh Mahoney made a cherry mel with a strain. I forget which one he used, but That was very good. I tried that one shortly after he made it, and I'm sure it just got a little bit better, as it aged out. But very good to start.
I'm cooking a cranberry one up right now for the holidays here.
There you go. Well, Sam, I'm interested in. Have you guys explored anything with some of these professional meaderies? Have you been in contact with anybody, or has anybody expressed an interest in using some of these wild yeasts?
We've had so there's a local meadery that just opened relatively recently here in Nashville called Honey Tree, and they've been by to talk local cultures. I know they do a lot of local sourcing of their honey, and we've had some interest. I'd say most of our customers are brewers, beer brewers, but we're definitely sort of branching out to make sure we know what works best for mead. And I mean, for our sort of a from our purposes too, we're trying to figure out what works best in hard seltzer too, because lots of people are making those too.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
We're trying to learn new things on the fly as well. So
it's almost like keeping up with the Joneses, isn't it? I mean, every time you turn around, there's something new being fermented out there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Sam, you had said a lot of the commercial yeast strains that we use have been, cultivated and domesticated over centuries, to produce just so, like the maltiness of a British ale or the fruitiness of a Pinot or something like that. But my question now is, because you were talking, as we go back and say you stick a glass of wort or a mason jar of must or a mason jar of wort, in the backyard under a tree or by a bush or, by the garden. My guess, and now you correct me if I'm way off base here, but my guess is that's probably not the yeast that's going to be able to produce for you a triple Russian Imperial Stout. So what should people expect as they kind of brew with a completely, backyard, harvested yeast?
I guess the short answer is you can't really expect anything. You can sort of expect, if you find something that makes beer, that's a success. I'd say within our local yeast captures that we get sent to us, the majority profile, or like the most common profile, is sort of a phenolic, somewhat like a saison yeast profile. Most of the yeasts that are captured in the wild seem to sort of fit in that profile. But like I said, I mean, the first sort of culture that started the whole bootleg thing was a lager yeast, an ultra clean, bottom fermenting yeast. We've found Brettanomyces, which is sort of a funkier organism, lends that sort of like barnyardy, sort of fruity, can be fruity flavor to stuff. There's the whole spectrum is on the table, I think, but the majority of wild yeasts are sort of fit that saison, Belgian-y kind of profile with probably some phenolics in there.
How about alcohol tolerance within that? Should people be thinking about trying to make low gravity, lower ABV stuff, or is that not a factor?
I mean, if you want to use a wild yeast you've just captured, I think a low gravity beer, low gravity, mead is definitely your first option. And then you could step it up from there. The only way to really know is to test it, in a higher gravity beverage. But there's plenty of wild yeast out there too that's positive for the Diastaticus STA1 gene, which sort of a super attenuator, and will, that's like the French saison yeast. Basically, it'll eat through anything. So there's those kind of yeast will definitely take you up to the double-digit alcohol percentage too.
Okay. Very good. Yeah,
So
I want to encourage. Oh, Jeff, just before you jump in, Jeff, I was going to say I want to encourage all of our listeners to participate in that if you can. Just take a mason jar of some 1030 or so wort or must, and see if you capture something and send it off to Sam and see what they find and help them build up that bank of zip codes. And I looked it up. It looks like there's 41,700 some odd zip codes in the U.S. So maybe we can help you get another dozen.
Yeah, we're on the way.
Maybe they can sponsor a Mead House strain.
If you send us a sample, it's likely that you will be able to claim your zip code. I'll say that.
Unbelievable. Jeff, you had something.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I was actually just going to ask in that whole zip code sampling process if anybody had actually sent anything that they had identified as specifically good for meat or specifically had been used in meat, as opposed to just here's the sample or here's this grape that I think might be good.
We've had there's a guy here who I actually don't know his name. I only know him as the bee guy. But there's a guy who keeps bees who has sent us a bunch of meads, and I believe he used a local yeast project capture. But I'm sorry, I'm going to come up blank on his name. Bottles of beverages show up at our lab, and we don't ask questions. So but I know he was the bee guy.
Yeah. Good stuff. Wow. This whole wild yeast thing is very intriguing. And I tried it here at my house. It didn't work. Of course, I probably didn't know what the hell I was doing to begin with. Talking to you and listening to you talk about this whole project and, doing a little bit of extra reading and everything, I can probably get it done. But like I said, I live in a kind of particular part of town here. I'm in Southern California. I'm in Los Angeles County, and there's one place that I could probably drive to and hide my jar well enough, and then go back the next day and pick it up. I might be able to get something, and I've always thought about that, But I've always been intrigued about using what nature provides. The simple recipe for mead is just water, honey, and yeast. And back in the day, there was, thousands of years ago. I mean, there was no Lalvin yeast. There was no packaged. It was whatever might have been inside the vessel that they put all this stuff in. Whatever might have been in the honey at the time, they put it all in. And it just,
there was Grandpa's magic stick used to stir the honey into the liquid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And guys today, even Ryan, I think you did one of cider, just letting the apples ferment. There's plenty of cider yeast out there that people like to use. I'm fond of the Nottingham, yeast. It's a British ale yeast, but just letting the natural yeast on the skin of the apple take it over, and let it ferment. And there's been some really good ciders produced from guys that have called in on the show and people we've talked to here on the show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's all around us.
Well, I'd like to continue on. Sam, I think you guys are doing something special out there. And where can they find Bootleg Biology yeast? Go ahead and give yourself a plug.
All right. We do if you're a home brewer, we do a home brewer direct sales 3 times a year. Actually, our next direct sale is coming up here in the next couple weeks. So we'll make an announcement on all of our social media, Facebook, Instagram, and let you know that's happening. And if you're on our email list, we'll send it out to there. And then you can also bug your local homebrew shop to order from us as well. And that we always make time to get homebrew shops yeast if they're looking to order it. So that's sort of maybe the best, most reliable way. And otherwise, you can 3 times a year or so we do the direct sale. So.
And your website is bootlegbiology.com, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That's it.
And that'll be, we'll put that in the show notes for sure on this episode, guys. Bootlegbiology.com.
Yeah, Bootleg Biology. Sam, thanks for coming on. And I know that you're going to get us on that distribution for that yeast so we can play with it. And we'd love to have you back once we are able to do that and talk about what we were able to make with your stuff and share that with you. So, we'd love to have you back. I'm going to try to send you 2 samples. I'm going to try to send you a sample from my home, and then I'll try to collect a sample up from my lake cabin and see if 2 different zip codes can help you there. But I think we're going to have to wait until spring because we got a cold snap here. It was down to like 15 degrees earlier this week. It was an unbelievable cold snap. So I'm pretty sure we're going to have to wait till those peonies that JD was talking about come back up before I can get you my samples. But no, we look forward to playing with your yeast and having you back on the show.
Great, looking forward to it, guys.
Thanks a lot, Sam. Good talking to you tonight.
Thank you.
Good talking to you all. Cheers.
All right, Sam Winnetka from Bootleg Biology. I tell you what, these guys, who would have thought? Whose bright idea was this anyway? I should have asked them that. And how did that start? Just take a wild stab at just, set a jar outside, start collecting yeast from everywhere, and develop this into a pretty viable company. That's unbelievable. That's just, welcome to America, man.
Well, and for all of our listeners that have expressed an interest in doing things the old-fashioned way or brewing like a Viking and things like that, take note. This is how they did that. This is how they found the yeast because it's everywhere, like you guys have said.
Yeah.
Definitely take some samples, send them in. Try this method. Why not? What do you have to lose?
I tried it. Like I said, I want to try it again. Not that I haven't given up completely on the whole thing, but I really think there's something there. I would like to take a stab at it and give it a shot for sure. You guys live, Ryan. You're like in the perfect country, man. That's springtime comes. I hope you got like 15 or 20 jars set out. All right. Thank you, Sam, for joining us here at the Mead House tonight. Wonderful talk, and for sure, we're going to get these guys back on to talk some more. And hey, you know what? Here again, the Aurora yeast that they have. And I found out the correct pronunciation. How do you say it? Kayik? Kawike? I've been calling
it bike.
Something like that. So,
although I've also heard quake like earthquake.
Yeah.
So I'm certain there are as many mispronunciations as there are homebrewers. And if anybody from Norway, Sweden, anywhere in that vicinity can please let us know.
Yeah, anybody who speaks the language, please give us a call. Anyway, so that Aurora yeast, that's another one that I really want to try that. I mean, for those of us that live in hot temperatures, if you're worried about temperature controls, that kind of thing, we know that particular strain works like a champ. And it sounds like this particular strain that they've come up with may offer some nice little side, that orange flavor he was talking about with some orange blossom honey. I can see all kinds of things happening there. So good stuff. Bootleg Biology, bootlegbiology.com. In the mailbag, guys, here a while back, we got an email from Brady. Bradley MacArthur, I think is his name. Bradley MacArthur, and he was doing I believe it was an amber braggot, if I'm not mistaken. And he says he really enjoys amber ales and mead, so he thought, why not? So he says, well, experimenting with a champagne yeast, and I'm going to venture to say it's probably the 1116, guys. Does that sound right?
18.
1118 probably is what he was using.
1118 probably.
Yeah, his gravity started out at 125, 1.125, and of course the final was, just flat out, just flat 1.000. I mean, that's just dry. And of course, I mean, that's nothing new about that yeast either. I mean, that's what that yeast is going to do. So he's still kind of new to the mead and brewing, but his initial taste seemed like the yeast may have given the malts some off flavors that I wasn't really expecting, and it could be the driest thing I've ever tasted. That's not because of the malt. That's because of the yeast, Bradley. Does time with braggots improve the flavor that much, or will the first taste give you a general idea of what it will be? So I thought we answered him back in mail. I like to take care of those things right away for our listeners. But I thought, this is a perfect opportunity to bring Bradley into the show here a little bit and talk about his dilemma, and perhaps we might be able to shed some light and come up with some ideas on how he could either improve the next batch or maybe even change the one that he's got.
Yeah. So I answered him, and I think the first thing I talked about was the gravity that you talked about. It was, sort of 1125 and went down to 0, and I said, look, I think that's doing the rough math. You're at 16 plus %.
Yeah.
And that's pretty hardy for a beer. And then it definitely is extremely dry. Kind of, you want to look fairly linear here, that if you are, going higher up, the higher ABV you go, the more sweetness you need, kind of balance that out.
Yeah.
So you're talking high alcohol, you're talking very dry, and yeah, that is going to pose some challenges. And then also the style it was made on, which was an amber beer. Now, he's making a braggot, but I try to stay in the neighborhood of that beer, and I've never had an amber anywhere close to 16%. No. I mean, I've maybe had an amber at 6%, but not getting that high. So is it kind of going to be our style? There's alcohol, really high in alcohol, really dry, and those are all going to pose problems. So then when he asks, is it going to improve with age? I tried to answer that in general first, and more specific in saying in general, yeah, depending on the style, I'm not going to age an IPA style braggot or something like that. That's the hop fallout.
Yeah.
But, say a stout braggot or something like that, a high gravity stout braggot that can put a little age on it, that'll definitely help. It just the same way it kind of softens up or rounds out some big imperial stouts. Now, with this particular one, I think I said something to the effect of, you got to. It's the differences are the improvements are kind of subtle. You can't put lipstick on a pig and have her turn into the prom queen.
Right.
So you think about that.
What do you think of his choice of
yeast? In general, with the braggots in general, I personally like kind of starting them off at like that 1060 range, and then kind of ending them around 1010 or so. So, maybe 1060 to 1010 or 1055 to 1005. My summer stuff is usually a little bit drier, a little bit crisper. Usually probably goes down to 1005. But I mean, I'm usually in that 6.5% ABV is where most of my braggots fall. Yeah. So that was just the advice that I kind of quickly threw out there.
Well, what's your thoughts on the choice of yeast, Ryan? Using a champagne yeast versus using a beer yeast. I mean, he's working with malts. What do you suppose the impact on the malt would have been using the champagne yeast? He's talking about having some off flavors. What he thinks are off flavors. You suppose that might be the culprit?
Probably. I mean, without knowing everything he did, it's difficult. I mean, I don't know if he used all grain or dry malt extract or liquid malt extract, and each of those can have different complications to it. If he's all grain, maybe could be anything going on there, or liquid malt extract. Sometimes it has liquid malt extract gets older, it can put some off flavors. But most likely it's the yeast. The champagne yeast is designed to do one thing: aggressively turn sugar into alcohol.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's not, not necessarily designed to throw really delicious esters or phenols or anything like that, or the phenolics or anything like that. So, it's probably the yeast, probably because it's completely dry. It's going to give you perception. I mean, if you add a little bit of sweetness in that probably would taste very different. Excuse me. Yeah, my rule of thumb on braggots is use the beer yeast that is traditionally used in the style of beer you're making. If you're making, a Belgian quad, use a monastic or a Belgian, monastic yeast or a Trappist yeast. If you're making a Hefeweizen braggot, use a Hef yeast. If you're making a British, style, a wee heavy or Irish ale or something,
yeah.
Use some sort of a British Isles or, an Irish, yeast to it. If you're not doing a style, the Chico strains are great. The Norwegian strains are great. I'm not even going to try to say the word anymore. I'm just going to say Norwegian strains.
Yeah.
If you just want to use those,
the K yeast.
There. But yeah, if you're trying to make a beer style and you're using a wine yeast and you're quintupling the gravity and it's going to start to no longer resemble its kissing cousin.
Yeah.
So I think that's just a great rule of thumb. Just
Yeah.
use the yeast. If you're making a braggot, use the yeast that is traditional of the beer style that you're basing it on. And if you're not basing it on a beer style, you've definitely got more latitude. But the Chico strains or the Norwegian strains are going to be great in kind of those. What do I reach for? Or what do I always have a backup of, or what do I reach for? Category.
Yeah.
Sure, they make a great default. Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff, you had kind of a different take. You went, you started out in the direction of back sweetening to try to maybe salvage a little bit. Talk about that a little bit.
So, yeah, let's revisit what Ryan was saying about a 16% braggot. That is a ridiculously high amount of alcohol. It sounds like a definite cure for sobriety. But think about the other alcoholic beverages that you have had at 16%. We're talking like we're skipping more or less most wines on the market. We're going right to like ports or fortified wines,
yep.
or like schnapps and things like that. We're not quite in the distilled spirits per se, but that's still a lot of alcohol. And it's going to be a palatable amount of alcohol, meaning you are going to perceive that amount of alcohol when you take a drink. What that goes back to is that's another thing you're going to have to factor into balance, and it's another thing that you're probably going to have to offset, like Ryan was saying, with sweetness. So I would definitely stabilize, and I would definitely back sweeten, and I would see if you get something salvageable. Now, what you back sweeten with is a little bit of an open category. Honey is an obvious option because we're dealing with a braggot, so you can throw honey out there to get you that classic mead character. You could also do something like a fruit juice, like cherry juice or something like that, and see if that adds another dimension to the flavor. That could be really good, depending on what you pick up. I would consider some kind of juice an option, especially, like right now, we've got cider season going on. There is a ton of fresh pressed apple cider on the market. You could cut that 1-to-1 with hard cider. After stabilizing, you end up with something very sweet, very cidery, but still 8%. So I think that could be a winner.
Yeah, and then you also mentioned as far as the yeast goes, the yeast selection. You also went in the direction of the Chico strains, US-05, so on and so forth. Talk about that a little bit. Kolsch strains, sure. Maybe it might be an option here.
Yeah. So we're kind of piggybacking on what Ryan was saying. You want to go with a style of yeast that is complementary to the style of beer you're going for. Or, if you're not using a style, complementary to what you envision it tasting like in the end. Because I know when you're putting together a style, generally you have if not a roadmap, kind of a general rough outline of what you're looking for in a final product. Most people aren't just throwing, a bunch of honey and a bunch of malt and a bunch of yeast into a pot and saying, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
So I think the yeast selection is going to be important here. Chico strains, whether it's it's US-05, it's 1056 from Y Yeast, or WLP-001. They're all kind of that very clean West Coast American ale. It's a great one for just a clean ferment that really highlights the hops in a beer. And I know a lot of mead makers that are doing a basic braggot that wants to be a little bit hoppy, have had success with that as well. For an amber ale, I would consider a Kolsch yeast for that same kind of idea. It's not going to throw a lot of different esters or off flavors, but it's definitely a German yeast that's a clean ferment, takes advantage of the malt character, such as it is, and creates something close to a lager, which is ultimately what an amber is. I think there are several different iterations of amber, so it's a little bit difficult to say what he was shooting for, whether it was an amber lager, amber ale, this, that, or the other. But anyway, Kolsch, I think, is a good option for this one. As again, it's an ale yeast, so it's very temperature giving, as opposed to a lager yeast, but it also ferments really clean. And again, those fake yeasts at a room temperature or slightly lower than room temperature, also very clean fermenters, also a very good option here. Even though, as we mentioned earlier in this episode, you get some really interesting stuff going on at higher temperatures too. So, think about it.
Yep. Okay, Bradley, I hope we helped you out there a little bit and went a little bit further than what we had replied to in the email. So, like I said, hope we opened up your mind a little bit to some different directions that you might choose. Would like to see you do this again and keep us informed and let us know how it goes. The second one I had, guys, is from Dan Shannon. This is actually on our Facebook Messenger, and I don't know which one he responded back, but he was asking about conical fermenters and using half-barrel kegs as fermenters. I don't know anything about that. I've seen these keg fermenters. Now, to me, the ones that I've seen are just plain old kegs or 5-gallon kegs that you can ferment in. That's not an option for me. I would not do that. One, if you're going to, I suppose if you're just going to do a straight up 5-gallon, nothing added, that's one thing. But, when you start adding fruit, this kind of thing, you're talking about displacement. That's where it helps to have a 7-gallon fermenter if you hope to get 5 gallons out of it. But conical fermenters, after using a bucket a couple of times, Jeff, I got my two twins from SS Brewtech. They're just the simple, inexpensive conical 7-gallon brew buckets, I think they call them. It comes with a spout on the bottom with a racking arm that you can insert, and then when you're ready to rack your mead or your brew from your fermenter into your carboy, you simply just twist the valve 180 degrees so that the racking arm inside is in the upright position. And you just start racking off. Just open the valve up and start racking into your. I like that feature. Typically the yeast all settles to the cone and the bottom of the fermenter, out of touch with the little racking arm that's on the inside. You're going to lose, maybe a couple of quarts or so. But that you should have figured in at the top, not the bottom. I typically put a recipe together. I always do it at the half-gallon or even the full gallon. If it's a 5-gallon batch, I'll go 6, or at least 5.5. But I like the conicals because they're clean. They have attachments. I like the fact that I have the cooling feature on both of them. I have it attached to a simple my cooling setup, which is kind of a half-assed DIY commercial type thing. It's actually an aquarium cooler or a hydroponics cooler. They're the same thing. It goes down to 37 degrees, I think, which is plenty low enough. I can consistently circulate 38-degree water through both fermenters at the same time. In a room temperature house, say 70 degrees. So I don't have any problems with the cooling, features on those two conicals. So I love them. I've often thought about, going the route. There's a couple of regular 7-gallon beer fermenters out there that I've had my eye on, but I keep going back to my twins. They're so easy to manage. They're lightweight, easy to clean. and sometimes simple is the key to everything. So I'm a big fanatic when it comes to conical fermenters. If you can get your hands on a stainless steel conical fermenter, do it. Believe me, you'll save yourself some time, some cleaning time. They last longer. You don't have to worry about the plastic scratching. There is some maintenance to them. I scrub them down every so often with TSP, and I sanitize them with the Star San. I mean, you got to keep them. There's some maintenance to it. So the O-rings that you can buy, easily found at Granger's or pretty much any online source for replacement O-rings that you need for some of the connectors. But I'm a big believer in the stainless steel conical fermenters, Joe. And I know you've got one too.
Yeah, I've got the Brewmaster bucket from SS Brewtech too. I think this is a great option for homebrewers because it's a price easy entry point at around $250, depending on the model you're getting. They are super easy to clean. The conical I really like because you get all the crud collecting in the bottom. It's not a just kind of spread out over the bottom of a bucket. Not that I don't still use buckets because I've got 2 or 3 of those running at the same time. I'm running something constantly in my stainless steel fermenter. But if you talk about it from a utilization standpoint, my stainless steel, my SS Brewtech stainless steel conical is never empty. I've always got something going on in there. I may or may not have something going on as an extra, but this guy is my primary. It is my workhorse. It is easy to clean. 9 times out of 10, I can get all of the crud and the yeast and the buildup from that, the high krausen and the brew and stuff like that off with hot water and a little bit of elbow grease. Yep. Resanitize, do the what is the term for building up the sanitized layer on stainless
That's what I was looking for too. I couldn't remember it.
Yeah, it's on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah,
you use acid like Star San, or other cleaning agents. I've seen people using Barkeeper's Friend for this as well.
Yeah,
but you build up a layer to protect the stainless steel inside it.
Right.
And it's going to kill me because in an hour after we're done recording and we've all hung up, I'm going to remember this. Wait, no, it's too late.
Yeah, too late.
So it's very easy to clean this guy, resanitize it, get it back into production. It takes less than an hour to go from down to back up and ready to go again.
Yeah, and those aren't the only 2. There are other conical fermenters out there that are quite nice too.
Let's see. One of our Patreon supporters, Brett Guthrie, I know, just recently got himself a Spike conical, one of their Unitank, I think, and has been raving about it. There are definitely some higher end models with a lot more features that are definitely worth exploring, but I'm really happy with the entry level that I've got here, and I think it definitely makes me go, stainless steel is the way to go. I definitely want to get at least another one of these, if not upgrade to one of those bells and whistles models.
Yeah. Ryan, you still ferment in plastic buckets, right?
I've got, I have, and I sometimes do. So, I buy honey usually in 5-gallon pails or buckets. And usually the last batch that I do, I just leave, I weigh it out. So if I want, 5 pounds, 8 pounds, 10 pounds, whatever I want in there, the last the last amount of honey that I just leave it in there, and I then fill it up with water, and I ferment right in there.
Yeah.
So I always, do it that way. But then I've got the big mouth bubblers, and I like fermenting in the big mouth bubblers because I can see what's going on.
Yeah.
I can see the fermentation. I can see it clearing. I can see everything. I like that. I like being able to see what's going on as I'm fermenting.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a trouble for me when I first got mine, because I kept popping the lid open, curious, wanting to know, make sure everything's working right. And I finally had decided, you know what, I got to quit doing that. Just quit doing that. Everything's fine. Okay, just let it roll, leave it alone. And then wait for a couple of weeks or however long you believe the yeast is going to take, depending upon what you use and your recipe and whatnot. You can kind of guesstimate a ferment time in there. And and then at the appropriate time, then pop the lid off, take your hydrometer readings, or sometimes I'll use the little racking arm spout on the bottom. If I know it's near the end of the fermentation, I'll go ahead and twist that thing up, take a little sample, and twist it back down again. I don't recommend doing that because there's a couple of times I had a leak down around that O-ring, but I thought I had to see everything that was happening too. And I thought, every time I take that lid off, it's just, there's probably a lot of that CO2 is escaping out of there, and I'm getting pockets of oxygen back into to the top part of the fermenter. And I thought, I don't want to do that. I need to leave it alone. So I got over that, and I don't even worry about it anymore. It is what it is, while it's fermenting, there's nothing you can do about it anyway. Even if something does happen, I guess, if it overflows or whatever, but then, these lids that on top of the fermenters, these stainless steel ones, they fit pretty snug. I had a couple of occasions where I've had stuff just bubble up right up through the airlock, and I've got this pool of liquid on top of the lid. But that was quickly, jam a piece of silicone hose in the hole and run it into a blow-off bottle and take care of it that way. But just a quick note about the half-barrel kegs, Jeff. With your local brew shop, you're working there. I don't know anything about these. I've seen them. I don't know if you know anything about them. You guys carry them?
No.
I have no idea what he's talking about, other than these. There's a couple of companies out there that, now I don't know if these are kegs that were converted to fermenters. I've seen those, adapters out there. They have lids that have drilled holes that you can actually put an airlock in on top of a regular keg and ferment that way.
Right.
But you're talking about
pony keg, yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about limited capacity. You're talking about strictly 5 gallons. That's it.
Yeah, and I've seen similar setups where they've set up, instead of an airlock, what they call a spunding valve, where basically like you have a pressure release that will set to release pressure at a certain point, say 10, 15 psi, which is like ideal for like that lager yeast that ferments at room temperature under pressure that White Labs was telling us about a while back. But no, I've not seen anything about these 15-gallon kegs as fermenters. Personally, as my brew in a bag setup goes, I have a 15-gallon keg that has been converted into a keggle that I got off Craigslist, which is not the greatest kettle in the world, but it certainly works. So I definitely use one of those in my own day-to-day. but I've not seen one used as a fermenter at this point. You're talking about a capacity of about 15 gallons, which is kind of a lot for something I would want to ferment.
Yeah. Okay. So Dan, I hope we help you out there a little bit. Dan Shannon, thanks for listening. Both you guys, Bradley and Dan, thanks for listening to the show. Really appreciate it. Let's kind of roll right into the Facebook friends here a little bit. Of course, this is where we kind of started out that way in segment 2. So this is just kind of a long segment 2. Consider it that. But we try to answer these questions pretty much based on our own experience. I think that says a lot. We have no formal expertise in brewing. I think it's very important to keep track of what you do in your own brew house, learning from your mistakes, keeping accurate notes, remembering what you did last time, being able to go back and refer to those notes if you want to, redo that batch that didn't turn out quite as well, and you've isolated the issue with it. So we try to tackle these questions that people have based off of that kind of experience. This is home brewer talking to home brewers. Home brewers that have been there and done that, talking to home brewers who have not been there and done that. And I think that's the big difference here. So with that, guys, Ryan, have you got a Facebook friend that you want to talk about tonight?
Yeah. So this actually comes from our friend Matt Whitey. He had this on Facebook. We were talking about making an ice cider. Mm-hmm. So again, to kind of recap with everybody, there's freeze concentrating and freeze distilling, and when you do it pre-fermentation, it's kind of freeze concentrating, and you do it after fermentation, it's freeze distilling. So when you do it before fermentation, all you're trying to do is really increase the gravity of your must. Yeah. So, or wort, I guess. So Matt was talking about how he can, what people have experienced when they've done that with cider before. So oftentimes, you make an ice cider or an ice wine, and kind of what you're really doing is you're just trying to remove some of the water from your cider or your grape juice by freezing it and then leaving some sugars, and you've got the same sugars but now a smaller volume, and your gravity's gone up. And then you after you get it where you want it, you ferment it. So Matt was asking about cider, I think particularly, but as how people have kind of freeze concentrated their ciders. And my method, which seems like a few people kind of agreed with, is put your must or your wort or whatever it is you're working with in a bottling bucket and freeze it solid. So you can put it in the freezer, put it in a chest freezer. If you're in Minnesota right now, you set it outside on the back porch and it'll freeze solid. And so wow. Freeze it solid in a bottling bucket, bring it back inside, put a hose on the spigot, and then run that hose into a carboy and open the valve, and then it'll start thawing. And then you just kind of turn it off as you get to as you get to the volume you want. So the water will stay frozen, the longest, and you can you can just, so that as it thaws, the higher gravity stuff is running out into the carboy. So that was my method. Again, if you want to do the grape juice, you could do that with any kind of juice, rhubarb juice if you want, if you're just saying that you want to, how do I kind of increase this gravity or concentrate these sugars, but I don't want to add any sugar. So I could see somebody doing that if they said, I really want a strawberry melomel, but I want a ton of strawberry in it. You've got your, I don't know, 60 pounds of strawberries, but now all of a sudden you just want to make it into a 3-gallon batch.
Yeah.
You could do something like that if you wanted to as well, and kind of boost up that strawberry in there. So anyway, it's not. I can kind of toss around the horn just to see if anybody has done anything similar or what your methods might have been. But I just thought that was one to point out here, as people might be making their fall wines or their fall ciders, and thinking about, hey, I want to make an ice wine or an ice cider or something like that. Jeff, have you made any sort of ice beverage like that?
I have actually tried the freeze distilling method. I had that, if you recall, the Stinger mead that we did. There was I cannot remember the name of the winery that makes it for the life of me.
Winehaven.
Really nice. Yes, thank you, Winehaven. Winehaven Stinger mead was a basswood clover blend. Really nice sharpness. I tried to make a basic clone of that with some basswood and clover blend honey that I had, and it came out kind of not bad necessarily, but not particularly noteworthy either. So I split it into a bunch of different batches, and I tried playing with it. And one of those batches I did a freeze distillation on, and the freeze distillation, as opposed to the freeze concentration, I don't think I'm going to revisit again, because it takes the bad parts and magnifies those as much as it takes the good parts and magnifies those. So I am more inclined to try freeze concentration, although I have not yet done so. We talk about fall wines. Over the break, I started my cranberry my cranberry mead project, and I had initially bought 6 pounds of cranberries to go into a 3-gallon batch. I very quickly decided I didn't want to hand process 6 pounds of cranberries, so I've cut that down to 3, and I think 3 is really all I needed from the amount of red color and red concentration I'm getting off of this batch. So, from my standpoint, I don't think I need to concentrate much, although in future batches, I'm definitely going to be trying the freeze concentration with more apple, pear applications and things like that are a little bit lighter in sugar content.
JD?
Well, the wife and I were at Total Wine here. It's been months ago. And we're cruising down the aisle that usually has the bottles of meads and dessert wines and whatnot. And she picks up this bottle and says, "What's this?" Well, it's in a little skinny 500 ml bottle. And I said, "Well, I think that's ice wine." And her buying method is not necessarily what it's made of or what's in the bottle. It's more about what's on the bottle. And so she fell in love with the label. So we brought it home and we cracked it open, and after 2 sips, it went right down the drain and I threw it away. Ice wines, we cannot get into ice wine. I just can't do that. So, so that's that. When it comes to freezing stuff, I'm very limited. I do have my little freezer here, but it's usually full of food, meat, that kind of thing. So I really can't freeze anything. I can freeze, like 1-gallon jugs in it. No, I haven't. And it's not something that really interests me. The ciders that I like to make are really dry. They're more along the lines of the British cider. I'm perfectly happy with the Kirkland brand, 100% unadulterated pure apple juice. 100% apple juice. I mean, I could care less what apples they come from, because I get the same results all the time. and my 2+ whatever pounds it might take to get me up into the 1055, 1060 range, and my 2 packs of Nottingham yeast, and I slap the door on the fermenter and let her rip. And that's my fall cider. And it's about as close to a magnet as I can possibly get without using cider apples and whatever kind of yeast they're using. So I haven't played around with anything frozen at all, Ryan. I kind of hesitate in doing that. Even the freeze distilling doesn't. There's nothing there yet that takes me where I want to go yet. But then on the other hand, I don't know that much about it. So I couldn't offer you an opinion really one way or another just based on that. Sorry. Next.
All right.
Jeff, what do you got, bud? You got somebody from Reddit?
Sure. Let me pull this back up here. User Jalexin4 says, just moved off the leave Sunday. How long before we bottle? We made 6 1-gallon batches a little over 2 weeks ago. The batch I used 2 pounds of clover honey in the batch I used 2 pounds of clover in stopped bubbling last Thursday, Friday, November the 7th, the 8th. I moved off the leaves on Sunday into a new carboy. There are no signs of bubbling in the lock. Water is level on both sides. Initial gravity was 1.07 on 1026. On Sunday, when I moved it over, it was 0.994. How long should we let it sit before we bottle? Do we absolutely have to stabilize with sulfite? My wife gets headaches from it, she says. Can I just cold crash before bottling? Not rushing, just not sure what the next step is and don't want to screw it up. I have 2.5 pounds bottle that is slowing down significantly. But I think that's a separate batch he's talking about, using 2.5 pounds instead of 2 pounds even. Yeah. So, again, this is a Reddit post, a little sparse on details, as we've seen from a lot of these.
Sure.
The interpretation I'm getting, though, from a final gravity of 0.994 is that that meat is done
Yeah.
and it is dry.
Nothing else is going to happen. The world has come to an end.
As far as those yeast are concerned, oh hell yeah, it has. I would say I have 2 points of input before I throw this around. One, in this case, as absolutely dry as it is, maybe not necessary to sulfite stabilize. Sulfate and sorite stabilize. There is nothing that the yeast is going to wake up and decide to eat later. It is bone dry. If you like the flavor of it as it is right now, and you're not going to back sweeten, you're good to bottle. The only thing that I would say, hey, don't bother bottling this guy. If it's not as clear as you would like, maybe cold crash, let it sit for a while, let it just clear out. Otherwise, you're pretty much good to go.
Yeah, or rack it again.
Yeah.
If you're getting any kind of sediment at the bottom, rack it again. Let it set. I mean, what's the hurry? At this point, at 994, years ago, I mean, talking 100 years ago when the internet first got started, graphical browsers and that kind of thing. I don't know if you guys remember this or not, but there used to be some funny pages out there, really hilarious. You click on this link and this page would pop up, and in big black letter, it would just simply say, "You have reached the end of the internet." This is the last page of the internet. It's like the world is done. Okay, at 994, just relax, sit back. If it's got some sediment at the bottom, you're not happy with it clearing yet, then rack it into another jug and let it sit. And then when you think it's done, take a taste of it. If it's where you like it, bottle it up and drink it. I mean, what's the hurry? That's my thing. Ryan fell asleep. Somebody text Ryan and wake him up, please. or he's doing a Jeff. He accidentally put his phone on mute. Well, with or without Ryan's commentary on that last little deal, we should probably drop it right there because we pretty much come to the end of the episode. So, hey, thanks for listening, guys, and hanging out with us here at the Mead House. And special thanks to our guest, Sam Winnetka from Bootleg Biology. You got to check these guys out, bootlegbiology.com, and read about that little kit, that little collection kit they got, and get started on collecting some yeast. Send them your samples. Thereafter,
take them to your zip code.
Yeah, make sure you put your zip code on it. There's Ryan. Did we wake you up? Hey, but don't forget, let us know what you're brewing, and we might even give you a call. Email us at info@themeadhouse.com, or just send us a message on Facebook like Dan did. Twitter or both at the Mead House. In the meantime, happy mead making. That's it for this episode. Ryan, flip the lights off. Jeff, slam the door shut. We'll be back next week with episode number 143 of the Mead House. We're gone.